Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna give folks a few seconds actually to gather before we get started.
The deploying troops on each of his territory. The latest in a series of security deals that the military with Africa, taking to pages concept see.
I think it looks like we have a quorum. Thank you for joining us. We're going to kindly ask everyone to mute and forgive us. There's a bell that's ringing for the waiting room, and we have not been able to disable that. So hopefully you can hear all of us through that sound.
I'm working on the bell.
Perfect. And we're gonna mute everyone if that's fine. There we go. Good morning. Welcome to the Program in Global Palliative Care lecture series. We are delighted this morning to be welcoming a world-renowned expert in our field, and we'll tell you a little bit about her in a second. My name is Hadi Khan. I'm an internal medicine and a palliative care physician here at Massachusetts General Hospital and on faculty at Harvard Medical School. And on behalf of our program in global palliative care at the Harvard Medical School Department of Global Health and Social Medicine, we'd like to welcome you to our lecture series. This is the second installment of this year. This platform is really dedicated to discussing topics related to the development of palliative care in low and middle income countries, including education, research, program building, policymaking, and specifically also contextualization of the field. Our program in global palliative care was started in 2023 with a vision for the world's most vulnerable to have access to palliative care that prevents and relieves illness-related suffering and promotes well-being. We work with partners around the world in Vietnam, Rwanda, Senegal, China, and beyond. And our hope is to produce palliative care leaders and teachers, to educate primary care and specialist clinicians to practice pain control and palliative care, and to pursue rigorous, relevant scholarship related to palliative care. With our regional colleagues, we hope to create and participate in a research network on culturally and context-relevant palliative care. In today's session, we welcome Professor and Dr. Anne Merriman, founder of Hospice Africa, who will be sharing with us her journey building and integrating palliative care across the world, and especially in Africa. I'm gonna turn it now to Dr. Eric Krakauer, who's going to introduce Dr. Merriman, our speaker for today.
Thank you, Hadi, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Eric Krakauer. I'm a palliative care doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I direct the program in global palliative care at Harvard Medical School. And this is a really special session for us, and I hope for everyone. We're really honored and delighted to have with us Dr. Anne Merriman, who will be very familiar to many of you. And forgive me if I get anything wrong, but I'm about to embarrass you, I hope, in a good way. Born in Liverpool in 1935, she experienced the bombing of Liverpool during World War II. At age 18, she joined the Medical Missionaries of Mary in Ireland and completed her medical training at University College Dublin in 1957. Thereafter, also completed training in child health, tropical medicine, and international medicine. After completing training, she went with the Medical Missionaries of Mary to Southeast Nigeria, which had been ravaged by the war there during the Biafra War, where she worked for some 20 years. serving those who were most vulnerable, already poor and then devastated by war. She left the order then and went to Singapore, where she founded with two partners in crime, one of whom I see with us today, Dr. Rosalie Shaw, founded the first hospice in Singapore and Hospice Care Association of Singapore, which exists to this day and pretty much provides hospice coverage for the entire country of Singapore. And there's some marvelous stories of founding and operating the Hospice Care Association out of Dr. Ann's apartment in Singapore. In 1990, she returned to Africa, first to Kenya, and then she was able to negotiate successfully with the Ministry of Health of Uganda to make morphine safely accessible. And she agreed to create a model hospice program in a country where morphine would be made accessible. And so when the Ministry of Health of Uganda agreed to that, she founded in 1993 Hospice Africa Uganda, which since then has been the global model of palliative care in low and middle income countries. As the founding director of Hospice Africa Uganda, she has been a global teacher and role model for around the world. About her, Archbishop Desmond Tutu wrote, "Anne has created a uniquely African template of love, dignity, and care, and compassion for people in the end stages of life. It is an organic African, Ubuntu-centric approach to caring for the dying that could be used across the mother continent and beyond." In 2014, like Archbishop Tutu, she too was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. So in my view, if there's hope for humanity, it will come from openness to others, and particularly to hearing, noticing, and responding to the suffering of others. And Dr. Anne Merriman humbly but powerfully can guide us, and has guided us, and will guide us in this effort, ongoing effort to remain open to others and to respond to the suffering of others. Thank you so much for joining us 1 month before your 90th birthday, Dr. Anne. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you can't hear me.
Yeah, come.
Oh, thank you, Eric, for that. Yeah, I'll be giving more details as I go through the whole thing. So it's a bit long. Because how do you fit 90 years into a small space? You can't. Yeah.
You can start.
I start?
Yeah.
Okay. So Eric has said I have a wonderful life, and I have had a wonderful life. And when I look back at my life, I often didn't know why I was moving from one place to the next. But now that I'm a bit older and have more time to think about the role of God in my life, I can see that God knew what he was doing. He was moving in different ways so that we could reach as many as possible. Our vision is palliative care for all in need in Africa. And it's so important that we continue doing that. So I'll be talking about that as we move on later. Okay, so I was born in Liverpool, so we have to begin with a song from Liverpool.
The next slide, you can play it on the...
Liverpool just won the league for the 20th time, and there's great excitement when that happens.
We speak with an accent exceedingly loud. Each under the statue exceedingly rare. And if you want to cathedral, we've got one to spare. In Liverpool. I was born in Liverpool, down by the docks. My religion was Catholic, occupation hard knocks. I'd stealing from lorries, I was adept. And under old overcoats each night we slept. In Liverpool home. In Liverpool home. We speak with an accent exceedingly rare. Feet under the statue exceedingly bare. And if you want a cathedral, we've got one to spare. In Liverpool. Well, when I grew up.
Okay, this is just showing you celebrations after this event recently. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, this is my family. I was the third child of my parents, which you see on the left-hand side there. That's my dad. He was mad on cycling, and that's him fooling around with my mum on a bicycle when we were on holidays, probably in the Lake District. And next to him, that's my brother. He was the eldest, and he became a Salesian priest. They've all passed. I'm the only one still alive of my family, really. And next to him is my sister Una. And this was taken when she was in Singapore. Her husband was in the army, and they were based in Singapore for quite a long time. And in fact, her youngest daughter was born in Singapore. And Una died about 5 years ago. And then, is that me?
Yeah.
No, that's me at the end there. Okay. Now, you can see the names of the children there. Joseph became the priest. Una married an army guy and was moving around the world. Myself, I was in Nigeria around this time. And then Bernard. Now, when we were children, we were divided into the two eldest and the two youngest. And sadly, my mother wanted to have a big family, as all the Catholics did in those days. But sadly, she lost 3 babies at 5 months, which now, as a doctor, I know she had an incompetent cervix. But this was in the 30s, the late 30s, and people didn't know how to do it. So they were told not to try for any more children. So Bernard, who was the youngest, was my mother's favorite and my favorite. Bernard and I even had a secret society, and we used to have little meetings and say it was us against the world. And, you know, we were very close. There was only 15 months between us. But very sadly, Bernard died on Easter Sunday in 1948. He had just sat the 11 plus exam to get a scholarship. He came home and he just held on to his head and he cried and said, I've got a terrible headache. And so they put him to bed and they called the doctor. The doctor said, call me in a week if he's not better. That week was terrible. You could hear him crying. He couldn't bear the light. You know, it was typical raised intracranial pressure that he had, but it's only looking back now that I can see it. And then when the doctor came back the next time, he said, oh, this is TB meningitis now. TB was a killer in those days. Not cancer, it was TB. And so he sent for an ambulance, the Green Infectious Diseases ambulance. The last time I saw Bernard was them carrying him out in a red blanket into a green ambulance and my parents going with him. And yeah, so I have written an article called A Holy Week to Remember, and that's all about the week before he died, because we hardly saw my mum and dad. They were in the hospital all the time. And this is another picture of us together. And we were actually, that was taken outside an orphanage. And this is Bernard, that's my sister Una. I don't see who that is. I'm somewhere on there. But anyway, so now I think you have an idea of my family. Okay. Could I see the next slide, please? These are the 3 continents that Dr. Eric is talking about. Europe, of course, that was England and Ireland. And then the next continent was Africa. I was actually 10 years altogether in Nigeria, and about 8 years of that was spent learning. I went straight from medical school to St. Luke's Hospital, Anoa. And at that time, that was owned by the medical missionaries, and that was passed as a hospital that could train doctors who were graduating from Ibadan. And then they could either go to the hospital in Ibadan or they could come to Anoa. And meanwhile, I was learning a lot. And I had to learn to do surgery. And how did I learn that? I would be told how to do the surgery operation, and they would have 2 beds in the theatre, and a specialist would be in one bed. Sorry, not in one bed, he'd be on one bed doing an operation, and I would be on the other. And if I got a problem, I'd yell over to him and he would tell me what to do. So that's how I learned surgery. Now, I just want to tell you about obs and gynae, because I loved obs and gynae. I thought it was a great vocation to go into obstetrics and gynecology. And Dr. Anne Ward was a very wonderful lady, specialized in oncology, what did she specialize? She specialized in childbirth, really. But I must tell you, as we go through, you'll see it's so important to know wherever you go, what is the culture in that place. Now, in Nigeria, I found that the culture could change a few yards along the road. But this particular area that I was in, it was a small tribe. Everybody was quite small. And a baby girl, when she was born, straight away, a man started paying bride price for her. So when she was 10 or 11 or had her first period, she was taken by that man. And she's come back to us dying often when she was 12 or 13. And, you know, she couldn't get the baby out for 2 reasons. One, she had a very small pelvis due to the tribal size, but also because she was so young, she couldn't push the baby out through the pelvis. Every one of us in that hospital, even the eye doctor, we all had to know how to do a symphysiotomy. Now, it's banned now, symphysiotomy, but that saved a lot of lives. It really saved a lot of lives. And I could still do symphysiotomy in my sleep. But the big thing was to move the attachments to the bladder out of the way as you were cutting through the kind of the thing that was holding it together in, the 2 sides of the pelvis. And we saved a lot of lives, but I spent a lot of time removing dead babies. It was so sad, and it was, but anyway, as well as doing obs and gynae and surgery, I was learning pediatrics. But this was curative pediatrics. It wasn't palliative care pediatrics. And we had children dying of measles. And the other thing is that women, as in most countries, were having a lowly position to the men. And the men had secret services, and they would march around the roads. And if a woman looked at them, she would have twins. They didn't want twins. They wouldn't take the 2. So we ended up with having babies left behind because the mother is afraid to go home with twins because she'll be accused of looking at their secret society. So it was, but as I've gone to many countries since then, I've actually visited 34 countries in Africa since we started international programs. I see more and more the differences in culture, the differences in economy, and in low middle income countries, 50% or more of the population are below the poverty line. Now, in most countries, it's getting very difficult because the hospitals want money. And if you go in with a very sick child, you go into your mother or somebody who's very ill, they will not admit that patient unless you've got the money to pay for it. And that breaks my heart, because we end up seeing a lot of people who are coming towards the end of life. They've never been seen in a hospital or anywhere before. And the majority of our patients are below the poverty line. Also, we've got a lot of elderly people who come to daycare, and there's no geriatric service, you see, at all. People don't know about the elderly. Now, I had, I've gone on to us, to Hospice Africa, but here in Uganda. But these people who are so poor, many of them can't pay for any treatment at all, and we try to give them free treatment, but we've for the last 10 or 15 years we have been struggling to get enough finance to do this. Okay, so it was Europe, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Sorry, I've got hiccups. So what happened was that my mother died 8 years after I had gone home, and I knew God meant me to be there with her. There was nobody looking after her, and she'd had several quiet heart problems, heart disease, and it's something that runs in the family. Even I have it, and it's they pick it up on an ECG very quickly that you've got a silent infarct. And anyway, my mother had been told she was in the Legion of Mary, which is a Catholic organization that goes out and helps the poor, and that she was told she mustn't do that anymore. She really stays at home, and she was at home by herself, and she relied on friends to shopping and things like that. So I came home. She didn't want me to come home. She was very upset, but my brother, the priest, talked to her and said, look, God wanted Anne with the sisters for so long, and now God wanted to do something else. He was very good at explaining to my mother the difficulties, and so I come home, I find her quite sick. I apply for a job, and I got a job in South Wales in a hospital there as the cardiologist was on leave, and I was representing the cardiologist. I had never done cardiology. In fact, I did a second one in cardiology later on. But as I say, once you're a physician, they ask you to come in as a locum when somebody is missing. So when I got home, and my mother was so ill, I needed a car. The medical missionaries lent me money to buy a car. And then I went down to South Wales in the car and stayed there for about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Now, I had never... Yes? Okay. I had never... No, what was it? Where was I up to?
When you went to South Wales.
Yeah. Okay, I'm home now with my mother. Okay. So when I come home from South Wales and I go to the bank to see my statement, I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen so much money in all my life. And, I said, the first thing I'm going to do is to take my mother for a holiday to the Lake District. Now, the Lake District was very special in our lives as young people. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah. I'm going back. Can you hear me? Okay. This is my mother when she was 18. You can see she's a very beautiful lady. And she and my dad married in 1926. The first child they had in 1930. That was Joseph. Now, when I was 4, my mother told me she used to get this magazine. And this magazine was called Echo from Africa. And it was published from Paris, from some sisters who'd never been in Africa in their lives, but they collected all the messages from the missionaries, and they would put them into this. And I saw this photograph of very sick children in Africa. And I said to my mum, when I grow up, I want to be a nurse. I didn't say I want to be a doctor. I wanted to be a nurse because nurses were caring and doctors are more after curing. And I wanted to be a caring person. Okay, so I was only 4 at the time. Now, that was 1939. The Germans decided that Liverpool was a key target for their bombing. On the right here, you can see the house where I was born. I was born in the front room up top, and it was snowing. It was May the 13th, but it was snowing. My friend who was born on the 3rd of May, it was snowing. We couldn't get a midwife to get in. So my friend and my mother's delivered me, and so it's what we call a corporation house, and we had to pay £1 a week for the rent. And my dad was a teacher in the centre of Liverpool, mainly with poor people. And I didn't know he was a teacher. I could see him writing in books at night, but I didn't know that was because he was marking papers. And I only realised what he had done when he became headmaster of the school I was at. I had another 2 years to do in that school when he came on board. And the teacher was trying to explain who he was. And she explained to us, because we never thought of this, about getting a degree. And I would have been, what would I have been? I'd have been about 9, I think. And she explained that she had a degree in science. And she said, so has Mr. Merriman that's coming as our new head. And I didn't know. He had gone to university. He was in the First World War, but I think he lied to get in because it finished when he was 18, you know. But he was shipwrecked, lost his watch, but kept his life. And after he left, he went to Liverpool University and did a Bachelor in Science degree. But he also loved plain chant. And many of you will know what I mean by plain chant. It's a beautiful rhythm of hymns in Latin and English. And he never learned the piano, but he could play the piano by ear. And he could play the organ by ear. And he was often called into the church to do that when somebody was unable to come. The real musician would come. So every one of us had to learn something in music in the house. And we had music teachers who would come to the house and teach us how to play the piano, except for Joseph. Joseph was trying to learn the violin. And it used to drive us mad, honestly. It was like a cat screaming in the morning when he was trying the violin. But anyway, he didn't stick to that for long. But we all learned the piano. And myself and Bernard would go to do the exams together. And after Bernard died, my mum wouldn't let me go to do exams again. She couldn't bear the thought of waiting outside with him there. And so I didn't do much more after that, except I was able to play the organ and the harmonium when I was a medical missionary in the very beginning. Okay, so you can see that's quite a small house. It had 3 bedrooms, 2 boys in one room, 2 girls in the other room, and my mum and dad in the master bedroom there at the front. And that week that Bernard died, when he came to Holy Week, he'd been in hospital about 2 weeks at this stage. My mum and dad were out of it nearly all the time. But on Good Friday, my mother came home to have a rest. And I was with her in this top room there where I had been born. And there was somebody knocked at the door. And my mother said, look out the window and see who that is. I said, it's Doreen Sulston. She's up there. She lives nearby. My mother nearly had hysterics because none of us had phones in those days, but that family had a phone. And she'd given that phone number for emergency calls. She just shot out of the bed and we never saw them again till Easter Monday morning when they came into my bedroom to tell us that Bernard had died. I couldn't cry. I was just dry-eyed. I just couldn't internalize that he had died. I never thought he was going to die. And, you know, on the Monday morning after he had told us, I said, I must go and see my friend and tell her. So I got on my bike, which had black handlebars because you couldn't have silver handlebars in case the Germans could see you. So I got on that bike and cycled to Pat, my friend, who was 10 days older than me, and we're still in touch. And while we were there, her mother opened the door and said, how's Bernard? And I said, he has died. And, you know, I still couldn't cry. And Pat was at a different school to me, and she was making drop scones on the top of the hot plate. And she showed me how to make them. And that's how the morning went by. And then I said, I must go home for lunch. I got on the bicycle and started driving pushing the bicycle home, not pushing it, I was actually riding the bicycle, but I must have fallen off the bicycle. And there was a park very near my home, and they had prefabricated houses in it. Now, this is when people were bombed out. They would bring this prefabricated house in 2 pieces and put it up, and it had 3 bedrooms. It had as much space as there. Anyway, when I woke up, I was vomiting into a bucket in this house. Now, I was terrified because a girl in my class had been killed getting off the bus, and I had seen her. She ran around the wrong way, and a car came, and she actually died in a few days. But everybody said, and she was coughing up blood, and I thought I was coughing up blood, and I thought I was on my way out as well. But anyway, I was saying what I had always been told, to give my address if I was in a problem. So I was saying 313 Queen's Drive, Liverpool 4, and the man, the father of the house, he went walking. It wasn't far. It would have taken him about 10 or 15 minutes to reach my house. And when he reached there, he knocked at the front door. My mother opened the door. He said, "Have you got a daughter named Anne?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "She's had an accident." Well, you can imagine. She just lost Bernard, and now this man is telling her, a stranger, that I was in an accident. My father came out with that man, and they went back, and they half carried me home and brought in the doctor again, the same doctor. The same doctor came in and he said, "Oh, she's got concussion. She has to stay in bed for 3 weeks." So I never got to the funeral. I didn't tell you, but my both her parents were from Ireland. They had come over at the end of the 19th century after they got married. And they had a greengrocer's shop downtown, but I think her dad was working in the docks as well. And my mother was only 4 when she was told that the father had died. He came home very cold. He sat in front of the fire, fell asleep, and fell into the fire. And of course, it's very hard to believe that kind of a story. But anyway, we had to believe it because that was the end of her dad. Now, he had a big family in Ireland. And when my mother was young, there was a boat that went from Liverpool to Drogheda. And Drogheda, all her family were from that county, in County Louth. And she would go every year to visit the relatives of my mother. And she did that until there was a very dominant lady who was the wife of a relative of ours. She had 5 boys and 2 girls, and every boy was a priest. Every boy. And when you get to know that lady, you think that possibly they forced them all to do it. But 3 of them stayed in Ireland, and 1 came to Liverpool and 1 to Lancaster. And so Father Val was, my Bernard was very fond of Father Val, and he actually said the Requiem Mass. But I, of course, couldn't go there. And people were coming in to the house all the time. And then the coffin was brought in and put in the front room. This is the front room down there in the house. And they let me go down to see Bernard in the coffin. People had always said we looked alike, but my nails are still the same as his. But because he loved his hair, and they had to shave his head, because in those days you couldn't do an arteriogram. You actually had to put dye into the carotid artery to see the way it went round in the brain. And that's when they found out that he had a cerebellar tumor. Now, he was such a bright, clever boy, and all of a sudden it came on board. Now, I understand since then that's one of the commonest ones that starts in the womb, apparently. I don't know. You can tell me more about it if you know more about that. But anyway, so I went down to see him, and he just looked like me. They had put something over his head so people wouldn't see that he's lost his hair, because he was very proud of his hair, and he would have a lovely fringe there, and what's that? Okay, so that was the hardest time, I think, in my childhood, was that time when we lost Bernard. Okay, so I was at a school. My sister hadn't got the scholarship. They were paying for her at a school run by nuns. I swore I'd never ever be a nun when I saw the way they carry on there. But anyway, she was dismissed because her hair was very big. She had a big head of hair and she couldn't fit the regulatory hat on her hair. And so the Land Rovers, the uniform was brown for that school, and the people who worked on the land, mainly women during the war, they had these, what do they call them, the army hats, and they had a big dinge around them. So my mother bought one of those for her to fit on her head and put the badge in. And the headmistress decided that that was against all what they wanted, and they actually let Una leave the school at around 15. My father was so upset, he took me away from that school, and I went to the same school as my friend there, where we were both labelled as mischief makers, and we had a lot to laugh about. But anyway, that was myself and the family growing up. Now, I never lost the thought that I wanted to go to Africa. And all of a sudden, when we were at church one Sunday, they announced that there was a new film on in town in one of the cinemas, and it was called The Visitation. And it was about a new order of nuns called Medical Missionaries of Mary. And I got my older brother to bring me down and watch it. And when I watched it, I saw Mother Mary Martin on a bicycle, riding from one place to the next and bringing medicines to people. I said, that's exactly what I want to do. So myself and my friend went for an interview when we were 18 or something. And we were both passed to join there. But Pat's father wouldn't let her go. He said none of his children were ever going to become nuns. So she stayed home, and I went when I was 18. I said goodbye to my home and goodbye to Liverpool for the first time. Next. Now, I'm going back now. During the war in 1939, can I go back to that other one? We had these shelters, and we called them Nissen shelters, but they're called an Anderson shelter. Everybody in every house had one. We had 6 beds inside here, and you couldn't have with the metal showing because the Germans would see the light shining. So we had to put grass sods over the whole thing so that it looked as part of the garden. And when the air raid siren went, my dad would come in and lift me and lift my brother and bring us down to this shelter. We would all get into the shelter. And we were getting quite used to it. And then suddenly, one day, we heard a terrific crash. We thought it was our house gone, actually. And when we heard the crash, we could hear glass falling down from our windows in our house. And we were all frightened to look outside to see how the house was. Where was it? And the house was in good shape, but all the windows, the glass had fallen out. Next, please. Okay, now up along the road, about 5 houses up, they had been bombed with a landmine. And my father wasn't admitted to the army, like most of the men, because he'd had asthma since he was a child. And he used to get very severe attacks. So he was in what they called the ARP, the Air Raid Wardens, and he and his friend went up to see where the bomb was. And the bomb exploded when they were looking down this deep hole where it had the landmine, and his friend was killed, and he was okay. We couldn't believe it, honestly. It was such a sad time. And my friend who's 90 on the 3rd of May says she doesn't want to celebrate on the 3rd of May because she wants to celebrate on the 7th of May, which was D-Day, when the war finished some years later. But this house, we'd never seen anything like it before because the walls would come down. You could see into their bedroom. You could see into their wardrobes. You could see everything inside that house. So, next, please. This was on a summer holiday in the Lake District. Once we were teenagers, my mother had found a beautiful house in Far Sorry, quite near Lake Windermere. And every year we would go, and my mother would allow us to bring our friends. And there's Una, and this is our dog Mickey. was called Mickey because we didn't want my dad to know it was a female until she had puppies, and then she had to know. But anyway, so that was us in the Lake District, and there's more slides of that. But see the next one, please. This was the last I saw of Liverpool, leaving the docks in a ship going to Dublin. And this is what we call the liver buildings. Liverpool is called after the liver bird who used to be dipping into the water in the lakes around Liverpool. So this was called the liver buildings. I had one job there, connecting people's phones in English Electric in that building. But one day I put the wrong button in for the head man, and he was talking to somebody from abroad, and that was the end of my time there, the end of my salary. So, but I had a great time at school. I really worked hard. My father was going mad with me because he was from a very high achieving family, and he knew that I had it in me to work hard, but I was myself and Pat were playing all over the place, and there was quite a few of us who spent a lot of time playing at school. So I left with very little results, both in O levels and in A levels. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I went there, but I had understood that myself and Pat, when we went for interview, were going to become nurses because they had a nursing school there. Next, please. First of all, you do a postulancy, and then after the 6 months postulancy, you are received, and that's when you get the habit. And there were 6 of us in that group. Now, some of my friends here will remember this is Bridget Corrigan. Bridget Corrigan was also a doctor, became a doctor. She was 2 years ahead of me at medical school, and she worked in Kitovu Hospital here in Uganda. And can you pick me out in that? Anybody know which of those is me? I'd hardly recognize myself.
Second one on the right.
Sorry?
Second one from the right. No, from the right.
Second one from the right.
That's right, that's me. But I had put on so much weight. My mother didn't recognize me when she came because I had done my postulancy in Tipperary, and they had this beautiful butter called Shrea Valley butter that, made from the farms. And I found I could eat 10 slices of bread in 10 minutes when we had a break. And I just kept going from one size of a dress to another. But anyway, yeah, I had put on a lot of weight that time. But Bridget is the only one that's still an MMM, and she's a wonderful sister. She's very spiritual, and she writes spiritual sessions for the other sisters. But now most of the people that I knew in those days have died. I'm one of the few still alive. There was while I was in the novitiate, there came a postulant from Liverpool, and she was a pediatrician. She had trained in America in pediatrics, and she joined the MMMs, and she's just died at 105. So they do live a long time. But I hope I don't live to that myself. Her father was a GP, and they lived in a very posh house. And when she came over to see me, she took me to see it. Okay, next. That was Mother Mary. You saw, this is her again. This is Bishop McGettrick. He was a Kiltegan priest who was the Bishop of Agoja. And that's me. And this was actually when I took my final vows. And this lady is the lady who paid for me to do medicine. Now, her name was Mrs. Kennedy Stanhope. She was from Boston. And the Archbishop of Boston was a big friend of Mother Mary's. And she went to him and said, I would like to pay for one of the sisters to do medicine. Now, there was 4 of us in that class, but Mother Mary wanted me to be the one. And she was very kind. She used to send me, we couldn't wear our habit when we were working in the hospitals. We had to wear ordinary clothes. She'd send me very nice clothes, and she would send me books that I couldn't get in Ireland, medical books that I was needed. This was the day that I was conferred as a doctor in the university. Next, please. And this, I always say, people often ask me, who inspired you to do what you've done? And I always say my mother was the first one to inspire me. My mother was very spiritual, and she was getting this journal, and that's what gave me the first idea of what I wanted to do. But the second person who inspired me the most was Mother Mary Martin. And we had a house of studies in Dublin, and we had to cycle into the hospitals every day. And honestly, it was a long way, maybe 9 or 10 miles. And it kept us fit anyway. But Mother Mary used to come once a month to visit the house of studies. And she always wanted to speak to the sister in charge of the students, which I was for maybe 5 of the 6 years I was there. So I got to know her very well. So she was the second person in my life that inspired me to do what I could see was coming. Next, please. This is the house in the Lake District that my mother had rented for us every summer. And now she then recommended that house to friends of ours. David's heart is still there. Their mother was at school with my mother, so they were family friends all the time. And now a daughter of David's has bought that house. So there it is. It's in Forsori, and you may have heard of Nearsori because of Gertrude Potter, but this was, and we were there as teenagers falling in love with every young man that passed the door, and my sister was in love with the farmers' sons when she was there. Next. So I've told you what I did in Anua, and I had 2 stints in Anua. And in the middle of that, I had slipped my disc when I was doing a locum in a FIGPO. And that's where I met Jeffrey Hines. Jeffrey Hines was a doctor who had gone there in the 40s, and it was now in the 60s. And he had sworn that he would never leave us because he was going on an outreach one day, and they used to take the car, and we get on one of these boats that you could go across with the car, and he'd go in the next bit he'd drive to where we were going to see patients. But this day when they went down to get onto this kind of a boat that took them across the river, it wasn't working. So we were told to leave the car there and go on a boat across the river. And they went in a boat, and it turned over, and everybody went into the water. And Jeffrey thought there was only one sister on it, and he thought that she would be able to swim because she was from Ireland. But he knew that the Africans couldn't swim, so he went after the Africans, and that sister drowned. He never forgave himself for that, and he said that he would stay there for the rest of his life. And I worked with him, such a generous man. He was the universal donor, and if there was a patient needed blood, he would give his blood every time. He was just that kind of man. He was doing everything there himself. But there was an elderly sister doctor who was in the group ahead of me, and she wouldn't go on leave. So they asked me to go up on weekends to make sure she got a bit of a rest. And I would be doing surgery and all the things that I had learned in Anua up there. And I remember one day we had a lady in labour. She couldn't breathe properly. And I had never done a tracheostomy before, but I had to do a tracheostomy to keep her alive. And I got to know that lady very well, and the baby did well as well. Okay, now, this is another time. I was in Edinburgh because I've been told to go to get experience in medicine in another country besides Ireland. And while I was there, they contacted me from Drogheda and said, we need a doctor in Oberdu immediately. Could you go for a year? Because the Italian medical missionary who was there was going home to a family for a year because somebody was very ill. So, of course, I just loved going back to Nigeria. So I said, yes, of course, I'll go back. Now, Oberdu was on the Biafrans and the Federals were the 2 people at war, and they met in Oberdu. And when I got into Nigeria, I had never seen everybody you saw was skinny. They were starving. The Biafrans were starving. When I eventually got to Obudu, to the hospital, everything had been stolen. If the Federals won, they stole. If the Biafrans won, they stole. So all the equipment was missing. And luckily, Canada gave us what they called as a disaster hospital. And that had camp beds. Now, very often in the children's ward, the child would lie in bed with their mother, would be in these are very narrow beds, camp beds. But they also gave us an X-ray machine that did positives instead of negatives. And we didn't know how to use it, but one of the priests, who wasn't considered to be a very bright guy, and he was so good at doing things, he set it up for us, and then he would give us the positives to read what was wrong with patients. And now I was in a hospital as the only doctor with a lovely team of sisters who were nurses. And every time I went out with the nurses, we would be stopped by the soldiers. They wanted to take the nurses and have sex with them. And I had to say, sorry, we're rushing. We've got an operation waiting for us. And that's the way we got away from them. But we only had 5 nurses in that hospital for the 200 beds. And one or two of them was always on maternity leave. So it was run mainly by little girls who had done up to what we call in England the 11+ exam. They were up to that stage and they hadn't been able to go any further. And they came and trained in there. And they assisted me in the night in the surgery. I was doing operations for 24 hours 7. And then they would turn up first thing in the morning. And, you know, I was so proud of what they were doing. And so we started a singing group and with them, and we dressed them up in theatre greens, and they went in for a competition, and they won the competition in the local area, and they were sent to Lagos to sing in the end, where they came 7th. But they thought the sound of 7th and 2nd was very close, so they came back and said they were 2nd. But anyway, that they enjoyed it. I, in those days, played the guitar, and you'll see one of me actually with the guitar later on. And so we sang a lot of songs together. But this little girl, that's me when I was good looking. And this is this little girl. I had got £1,000 from my parish to put up a malnutrition unit, and we had lots of children coming in. And that little girl used to call when I was operating, she'd call me through the theatre window. She wanted to talk to me. And there she is, trying to listen to my chest. And you see the little girl behind her. Look at the legs on her. They're so skinny, you know. Oh, it was a very difficult time, but I enjoyed that year better than any other I had in Nigeria, I must say. Because this little girl, she died. Her mother was dead. Her father would land her on us, and we would look after her and put on weight. And then she'd go home to stay with her grandmother, who possibly didn't have enough money for food. Next, please. This is a book that I wrote when I was in Singapore. Well, I was in the Department of Public Health, and they wanted me very much to help them. Their population pyramid was standing on its head. I think you know what I mean by that. It meant that the elderly were the biggest number of people, and because the government was giving free education to 2 children in each family, many of the families just had 2 children. So there was very few young people that were going to look after the elderly that were coming up. So they wanted somebody in that department to show that we could do geriatric medicine. Now, before that, when my mother was ill, I had been trained in geriatric medicine, and I was teaching in 2 universities, Manchester and Liverpool. And finally, I was a geriatrician in 2 hospitals. I was covering them both. That's when I first got my inspiration for palliative care, because we had a long stay ward, and the doctors were going in, and they didn't want anybody to die. They were trying to cure them, but they were making them so sick, giving them all manner of antibiotics. And you know, pneumonia used to be called the old man's friend. But, you know, that old man's friend wasn't allowed to exist in those long stay wards. So I wrote this book, and I had, there was another lady there, a young lady who had done geriatric medicine, and she promised me that she would write continuing series of this, because I had done a lot of statistics in it about, Southeast Asia, and because it was, it was fixed in time, it needed updating every time it would come out again. But I got a big compliment from a professor in geriatric medicine in Australia, and he said, this is going to be our standard book for teaching geriatric medicine in this country. And he said, so then I came to the time when I was leaving. I had done 2 contracts with the university, and I didn't quite know where I was going. Now, when after my mother died, I did a degree in international public health, and I did my research in India. Now, I'd never been to India before. We were based in Benares, which is the holy city of Hinduism. I had to learn, my research was on the LDA of India and interviewing them. And then I had to learn about the medicine, because they had Ayurvedic medicine as well as general medicine. And I had to learn about those medicines. And I had to learn about the religion, about the Hindu religion. And because we were living in a hotel in the middle of the holy city, we saw, people being burnt. And shortly before I was there, women, when they married, knew that if the husband died, they would be burnt to death on the wooden pile, along with the husband. Now, the law changed that shouldn't happen, but many of the older women said, I got married knowing this, I want to die with my husband. So, it was a very difficult time. I went, 4 of us went together. The other 3 were African looking. One was from Zimbabwe, and it was at the time when, the whites being thrown out of Zimbabwe. He was a nice guy, but, you could feel there was a border between me and him. And then we had a young man from Nigeria with us, and he actually brought his wife out, who was very pregnant, to have a wedding in Liverpool when we were at the school. And they had the reception in my house, and it was my call. They got dressed up with ribbons to show them going to the chapel. They went to the Liverpool Cathedral to be married, and a priest that had been in Nigeria married them. And then they came back to my house and had a big hoolie in the house. And so in India, I swore I'd never go back again, because I saw the terrible way that women were treated. I always thought that the bride price was not a good thing here in Africa, but there's no bride price there. The man, if the father wants to get his girl married, he has to find a man, and he has to pay for that man, and he has to pay for, did he want a car? Did he want something for the kitchen? Whatever. And if he didn't get all he wanted, you'd find that his wife would be burned to death in the kitchen. Now, this was happening. It was in the papers nearly every time. That was in the 1980s, the early 1980s, that a young woman had been killed. And I was at a wedding, because it was the wedding season. The man would come in on an elephant, all dressed in white, and the poor lady that was leaving her home and all those she loved was sitting inside wearing a red dress. And, and sometimes they could go back to their family for a week or 2, but you would see them being taken, because when they were taken, they would go to, they really hadn't married the man, they'd married his mother, and his mother wanted them to do all the slave work in the house. Sorry. Yeah. So, a lot of it was hard to take, but Ayurvedic medicine was very good for stroke and these kind of things. So you'd find that the elderly will be going to Ayurvedic and the children will be taken to ordinary Western medicine. But also they had a cancer hospital in Benares, and the hospital was on strike, and there were people on the roads vomiting blood with TB or with cancer. And, you know, it was a very sad time. Now, nearly all the nurses there were from Kerala. Kerala was right down in the south, and these nurses were allowed to do nursing. But the Hindus would not allow their daughters to do nursing. They wouldn't let them near a bedpan or to help a patient. So all the nurses that we met, and they were all Catholics mainly, because Kerala was a Catholic state, but also a communist state at the same time. And I eventually got myself to Kerala, all right. But one of the people that did medicine with me was from Kerala, and their nuns had a big hospital there. So I went down to them, and we actually went to the edge of India where the three oceans meet. And my friend, who I'm sure has passed now because she was older than us at the time. But this book, Lee Kuan Yew's brother was a general practitioner, and he wrote the foreword for this book. I don't have a copy anymore. And the reason I often say to people, you can borrow that book, but they never come back. When you ask them to borrow it, they think I've given it to them. So there's no copies around, but I've got it online. Now, you can see in the picture at the front, they're all Chinese people. And Professor Williamson, who had written the foreword for the book, he was very upset. He said, how can you have international geriatric medicine and all the pictures are showing Chinese? And I said, but my artist is Chinese. He has to do it the way he is doing it. So anyway, we got it done. But that was the only copy that was ever made, because that lovely young lady that was in geriatric medicine, I didn't know. She had a mitral valve problem. She already had one operation. And she went for the second operation. She died on the table. And she'd only been maybe in her late 20s. And, you know, it was so sad because they needed geriatricians in Singapore at the time. Next, please. Okay. I'm speaking as long as I want to, remember. Okay. So they're reminding me that time is flying past. I'm sorry, I'm keeping you all. I hope you're all listening to what I'm saying. Okay. This is a book that I wrote in 2010. And it's a beautiful book, and people are still looking for it. But sadly, you know, being in Uganda is very different to Singapore. In Singapore, they see what's good and they go for it. In Uganda, put it on the shelf. So that book never got a second edition, but it was on Amazon for a short time. Now, the book at this side is the book that Eric read, and it's called That's How the Light Got In. And that is a song that was sung by the Jewish man, you know,
Andrew Cohen.
What's his name?
Andrew Cohen.
Andrew Cohen. And the song starts off with, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And it makes you realize all these cracks in your life are letting light in. And I just love that song. So that's what we called the book. And this book in the middle is really a bestseller. But again, we're not selling it fast enough, because this is 30 stories told by patients, by relatives, by community volunteers, by the nurses, from different perspectives. And it's a very moving book. And there was a lady here from Japan, and she read the book and she sent it to the palliative care doctors in Japan, and they translated it into Japanese. Because it's a really very moving book. And so those are the three books we have at the moment. So next, please. Now, what is a vision? Because we talk about following a vision, but we don't really know what it is. This is a picture taken from my balcony of the Lake Victoria, and the sun shining on it as it goes up in the morning. Next, please. My definition of a vision is a dream with practical implications for the benefit of mankind. Because we can all have dreams about what we want for ourselves and for our children, but something that's going to be bigger than that, it has to be for the benefit of mankind. And for those of us who believe it comes from God. And we talk about our God because we accept all religions. And strangely enough, all the new religions that have started since Christ, they started because they saw a lack of compassion amongst the other churches. Christ showed us compassion. We'll be talking about it again in a minute. And we have to have compassion when we see these patients. And our nursing team is a great team. And well, you would have seen at the beginning that it doesn't just say Hospice Africa, it says IHPCA. That's the Institute of Hospice and Palliative Care. And that is our institute. And we train people up to master's degree in palliative care there. And we have a great fun at the conferring then. And 4 or 5 of our nurses have already got a master's in palliative care. But doctors don't do those exams. They think because they're doctors, they know everything. But, they can't know the compassionate care that is needed. And God communicates to us through experiences and circumstances in our own lives and the needs of others. So he does, if we believe in God and we talk to him. But one of the biggest problems I've found in the last few years, most people had got an attachment to their religion more than to God. And it is very important that we have a relationship with our God. It may be Allah, it may be Jesus Christ, and we learn from them. Next, please. So why are we called hospice? Now, the first hospices were places of hospitality that sprang up on the way to the Holy Land or to Rome for people doing pilgrimages on the way to Rome. And this is about 300 years after Christ. And this was started by a lady called Fabiola, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, because her picture hung on above my piano, and it had been brought to my mother by one of those 5 priests. When he came home after being ordained in Rome, he brought her this picture, and we didn't know what it was until eventually she gave it to a cousin, and we could see the back of it, and it has her name on it. Anyway, so England was a Catholic country, and all these hospices were Catholic and run. For anybody sick would go to the hospice. And then along comes Henry VIII, decided he'd like to have 7 wives instead of 1, and he changes the religion to the Church of England. And he closes anything that's done, because these hospices were run by monks and by nuns, and he closed them all because he got rid of all the orders. So the word hospice means hospitality. And the word hospital comes from that. But you don't always get hospitality when you go into hospital. You get it when you come to us in hospice. Next, please. Next slide, please. Now, this is Fabiola. Isn't she beautiful? And Fabiola started hospitality for pilgrims to the Holy Land 300 years after Christ. So by the time I realized who she was, I had to go after my cousin who had died, and her friend was holding that picture, and I got it back. And it was hanging in my house in Liverpool. And I don't have a house in Liverpool anymore. I must check on my cousins what they did with it. Okay. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. So where did our vision come from? The head of the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, he knew I wanted her, but he said, I was then in my 40s, he said, don't you go back to Nigeria, you never know what will happen. And I knew what he was talking about, because we treated so many young men who came out as volunteers and they needed treatment for gonorrhea. And he said, I have two countries looking for somebody to teach public health. Now, I didn't feel very adequate to teach public health, but I went, first of all, to Malaysia, to Penang, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. And in Penang, they were just starting a university, and it was only on its second year, and it was free to Muslims. 90% of them were Muslims, and they were dressing in clothes where you couldn't see them, and it was such a hot country, and they were smelling, and it was very difficult. But there was 10% of the places could be bought by richer people in. So we had very, very clever Chinese and very clever Indians in the last 10. But you see, they were only starting, and I was the only one in public health, so I suppose I was the top and the bottom of public health. But then, because I was a clinician, they had opened a hospital in Cotabato, which is the other side. It's facing the China Sea. And they wanted me to go there to help them. Again, it was, they had oxygen attachments in the wall, but no oxygen in them. Because this hospital was built as a teaching hospital by the Ministry of Education, and they didn't really know what they were doing. And anyway, I found the Muslims very difficult to work with. They didn't like Christians at all. And I was staying in a house that was rented by one of the professors, and he was using their pots and pans, and he was using pork and things like that, which they didn't like to be used in anything. And when they came back to claim the house, I went back to get my mail. The man refused to give me my mail unless I bought all his pots and pans. I said, no way. So eventually, the professor who actually had rented the house bought all the pots and pans and gave me, some of them were still in our kitchen here. Now, this is Sister Geraldine. Now, Sister Geraldine is a Canossian sister, and their founder was a slave, and in America, I think, and she was from a Buddhist family, and she saw the sisters and she saw what they were doing, and she went to them and said, I want to join you. And they said, but you have to be a Catholic. She went and spent 2 years learning to be a Catholic, and then she was baptized and she joined the sisters. And she had been to a hospital in London to train in palliative care. So when I came wanting to bring in palliative care, she was the only one that knew what I was talking about. And I gave a talk to which I invited many nurses, and many of them wanted to do palliative care. They wanted to follow me on my home visits. And Geraldine and Sister Mary Town from that congregation, where they had a home for the elderly, they were very supportive to me. And, I had a lot of support, actually. But I also had support from the people in the Department of Public Health with me. And it was called, what was it called? Department of, oh gosh. It includes occupational health, and it includes general practice in the Department of Public Health. And 3 of these guys who were young men when I was there, I was much older than them, but they didn't notice that. They are still writing to me every day, and it's good and to know what's going on in Singapore. Singapore is running very well. When I was leaving, we had looked for a place to start the Hospice Care Association, HCA, and I offered my flat, and the master bedroom was where it started, in the master bedroom. And we wrote an article about the master bedroom, and everybody was reading it to see were there any juicy bits in it, but there wasn't. So I stayed with them for about 6 months after that. And then we had a conference, a palliative care conference, and Robert Twycross came. I think most of you will remember Robert. He only died last year. And Robert was, to me, the first son of Dame Cecily. He did a lot of the research on morphine and heroin and the difference between them. And he was a big researcher, and he wrote the National Formulary for Palliative Care year after year after year up to the time he died. And he brought with him his secretary. His secretary was a lady in her 60s who had just married a man in his 70s, I think, and he was a lawyer. She was very much in love with him. She would be on the phone saying, dearest darling, and everything. But she had been married and she had a family. I think the husband had died or had left her. She brought up the children. They had all done very well. And now it was her time. And she was on the board of a new organization called Nairobi Hospice. And when she saw me and knew I was moving, she said, would you come to Nairobi? I said, oh, I'm dying to go back to Africa. And she said, will you come for an interview? So they paid for me to go for an interview. And I went for the interview and I took with me that book on international geriatric medicine, because inside of it, I had the formula for oral morphine, which I had worked out on with the younger students in pharmacy in the National Hospital and at Kentridge. And you know, it was very, very good to work with them. And I wanted a pure solution of morphine, so we would know whether they had too much morphine or whether it was something else, because the only thing we had was Brompton cocktail. I think anybody who's in palliative care will have heard of Brompton cocktail. And Brompton cocktail, I presume, was made in Brompton Hospital in London. And it consisted, okay, of morphine, but it also consisted of a sedative such as chlorpromazine to help them to sleep. And there was lots of, even the local brew was poured into it. So for here it would be Warragy. In England it was probably whiskey. And so they were getting this medicine, and you couldn't tell whether it was they had too much morphine because it was making them sleepy, or whether it was the other medications in it. So we together with those pharmacists and with the blessing of the chief pharmacist in the National University Hospital, we designed that. And I didn't realize how cheap it was, because all healthcare was free in Singapore. It was only when I came to Nairobi Hospice I realized how cheap it was, and it still is. Next, please. This is, oh, can you go back to that one? Yeah. This is Dr. Cynthia Go. You will have heard of Cynthia. She joined me after I had been in Singapore for about a year. She had been doing her membership. Her husband had been getting trained in rectal cancer and rectal diseases, and they both came back together. And the sisters here, and Sister Geraldine is there. That's another sister, and that's me there. And this they lent us 8 beds. 4 for men and 4 for women, that we could use if people were at home and had nobody to look after them. So this is us, visiting a patient. This one is taken in Sarawak. I only went to Sarawak to teach after I had left Singapore, and what a welcome I got. And they're still some of my best friends. They have been building a hospice for Sarawak in Kuching. Kuching is the capital, and Kuching means pussycats because it was full of cats. And this is a Muslim lady in the bed, and I'm holding her hand. Now, when I did this in Africa, the people couldn't believe that I would touch a patient. I don't know why. And it means so much to a patient to hold their hand or to talk to them, you know. So when I was in Sarawak, I went round a ward. They didn't have a hospice, and met this lady. Next, please.
Anne, excuse me for interrupting. It's so wonderful to listen to you, but some people, many of us may need to leave in about 10 minutes. And so I wonder if in the next 5 or so minutes or 10 minutes, you could give us
Africa, yeah, okay.
guiding thoughts. And we haven't even gotten to Hospice Africa, so there's so much I'd love to hear from you. But if you could kind of summarize or tell us about Hospice Africa in the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. I told her that I was at Nairobi Hospice, and while I was there, I was having a struggle with the chair of the board. The chair of the board was a very famous oncologist, and he had the only children's ward for cancer children in Africa at the time. And he was very threatened by me because I knew more about another kind of care for them. And in the end, I thought, I went to see a lawyer, and he said, this happens all the time here. If you're doing things better than him, they're going to get rid of you. And he said, if I was you, I would resign. And Dame Cecily Saunders had written to me and asked me to write an article in a Christian journal called Contact, and it was read by many countries in Africa. I got 7 countries writing to me and say, help us to do what you're doing in Nairobi, because I'd written about one patient in Nairobi. They said, we want you to come to our country. So I left Nairobi and I went back to UK. I worked over a year in 2 different hospices. I was doing what I was doing. I was locum medical directors in Birmingham and Myton Hamlet. And it was very far away from Liverpool, but I had to get up to Liverpool every weekend because we were forming the board and we were writing the constitution, and it was a very busy time. And at the end of it, we decided we had to do a feasibility study amongst as many countries as we could. But there was only snail mail in those days. You don't have email, you didn't have WhatsApp. So we couldn't get in touch with all of them. We only got in touch with 4 countries, and one of those was already well established. That was Zimbabwe. They had a wonderful place. Okay, next slide, please. I just wanted to tell you about Chusin. Chusin was married on the 27th of December 1987, and she died the following year on the 28th of December. And they had got married and they wanted to have their honeymoon during Chinese New Year, which is a big holiday. So they went to Thailand, and she got pain in her stomach, and she thought it was the Thai food, which is very hot. When they got back, she got checked and she had cancer of the stomach. She was getting the worst pains, cramps in her abdomen I've ever seen. And I wasn't able to control it. I rang Mary Baines in St. Christopher's. She advised me what to do. And after that, we were friends. And I didn't know that she had worked in a jeweler's place. But before she died, she gave me this ring. I don't know whether you can see it, which shows that we would be together forever. You know, she knew she was dying, and it was a sad time. Next. So this is the history of palliative care in Africa before we arrived. 1990 to 92, Sub-African did not include South Africa. You will all remember that time. In 1979, Zimbabwe were the first to ever have palliative care. And when we went to visit them, it was all over the country. And then next year, 1980, South Africa, it started in Cape Town, in St. Luke's Hospice there. And I could tell you more about that, but we don't have time. So we were the 4th country to have it. And when we started, there was only 3 countries had it. And we selected Uganda as the model hospice, not the Mosul hospice. And it was suitable to different African countries. And that meant that we were going to teach people in different countries. And our vision is palliative care for all in Africa. And you can only do that if you're going to introduce palliative care to 54 countries. I actually visited only 34 before I was unable to fly anymore due to health problems. But I finished in 2020, and unfortunately, not many countries have been seen since. Next. When I went to Nairobi, there was 2 people sitting in this, 2 Mzungus, 2 nurses. One of them was, the founder was Ruth Wooldridge. She was the wife of the BBC correspondent in Africa. And she was a nurse, but she wasn't in palliative care. But she knew that there was something that could be done for the patients coming out of hospital in severe pain. And the strongest medicine they had for pain was codeine, and only the rich people could buy it because it was so expensive. And I told them, I won't come to you unless you get in powdered morphine, and we're making it. And 6 months later, they contacted me. They had the morphine in. It was Professor Kasili, the man I had a problem with later on. He had got it in because he was very much in with the government, and they started making it in the pharmacy in Nairobi Hospital, which is the private hospital there. Next, please. Yeah, this is the article that I wrote, which I've told you about already. Okay, next slide. We had letters from these 7 countries, asking us to do for them what we were doing for other people. Next. So it was decided we should do a feasibility study. We went to 4 countries. The first country we went to was Nigeria, because Nigeria was my favorite country. I'd been there for a long time. But honestly, Nigeria was in bits. There was a lot of corruption and a lot of thieving, and it was really difficult. And also we realized that because they were very high on the corruption list, we wouldn't be able to get funds. So we went looking elsewhere. And the next took, Kenya had asked me to go back to Moy University, but the people in Nairobi Hospice were afraid that I would be taking money that they wanted. So I didn't want to offend them any longer. So then I came to Uganda. And when we came to Uganda, next slide, please. It was Fazal and myself. You saw the two of us standing there. And this is the Minister of Health at the time. Yeah. His name is James Makumbi. He has passed since then. But he, you know, at that time, 38% of the population were HIV positive. He had double cancer. And when we went to see him, he said, please come to my country, bring your palliative care, bring your morphine, control their pain. He really cared for the people of Uganda. And the war had just finished and people were terribly poor. But Museveni had already put in big, good roads to cross, because a lot of materials from the boats in Kenya and in Tanzania come through Uganda to move to the other countries. So this is what he said: my people are suffering. Bring in your palliative care. Bring your affordable morphine. We need you. So this is 93, and we came. Next, please. So Hospice Africa was to be the model. But next, please. I'm jumping a bit here. Yeah. But while I was in Nigeria, I learned a big lesson. I went back to the hospital where I had worked previously. It had now been taken over by the Catholic Church. The sisters were just one sister left. And she asked me, could I see a patient who needed palliative care? This patient had gone home. That was Akpan. And she had cancer of the breast. And one of the traditional healers had incited, thinking it was an abscess. The smell of a dead body came lingering ahead of her when she came in to see me. And I was there without morphine in my bag, without any medical equipment. And I just realized for the first time what health workers were doing all over Africa. These health workers couldn't help the patients because of this, the lack of knowledge of pain control. And now the smell that you get of a dead body from a rotting wound in cancer can be covered by metronidazole. And we were using metronidazole even when I was in Anua for liver pathogens, and it was great. They had it, but they didn't know it could take away the smell. Next, please. Getting in morphine was very difficult because although the minister wanted it, and nearly everybody in the Ministry of Health thought I was bringing in euthanasia, I was going to kill people with it, because the senior doctors had graduated when I had in 63. And in 63, that's what we were taught. Don't touch morphine. And so we, keep going. Can you have the next one, please? Yeah, this is go back on him. Yeah, this man is Michael McGoldrick. He came out as a new pharmacist. He made morphine at the kitchen sink. This lady is Rachel, one of our very good nurses. And she's looking much younger there than she is now. But Michael, since then, he married and he has 4 children. And his eldest girl is going to be a doctor this year, and the second one, a doctor next year. So they'll have 2 pharmacists and 2 doctors in their family. But they're coming out soon. They do come out. Next. So the sisters at Nzambia Hospital let us use a house called the VMM house, which had been built by one of the volunteers. And these were the first steps that we had, but we had nowhere to see patients. So I left her by herself while I tried to get money in America and Canada, only to be told that the governments in these countries said that they could give money for curing, but not for caring. I couldn't believe it. A government saying that. I don't think they'd ever had a relative die in pain. But anyway, this is what it is. Brendan House was completed in 2010, and that's our clinical downstairs. Upstairs was to be international programs, but by this stage I wasn't able to do the stairs, so that's administration, and Merriman House is international programs. Next, please. This was our first hospice in Endeavour, which is in a very busy area where they're making lots of things in metal, etc., and selling them. And Henry Mary Cattarega was one of the great people that helped me at the beginning. He owned 2 Mercedes-Benz. There were only 2 in the whole country, I think. And one of them was open, it was an open car. And he would come and say, come on, let's go and look at some houses you could have for your place. We were looking for a house where Fazal and I could stay, and we could have a clinic in the front of the house. But he gave us this to stay in initially, and it had a garage, as you see here. And that's where we saw our patients. This poor young man. Next, please.
Sorry to interrupt again. It's now the official end of our lecture, but I just checked and there were 150 people following your lecture, which is, I think, more than we've ever had. And so I would say, for those who need to sign off, thank you for joining us. For those who'd like to stay on, please feel free. I have another 20 minutes or so before I must go. So I would say we can continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Okay. Now, we were the first country that allowed nurses to prescribe morphine. There was very few doctors in the country in 1993. I think it was 1 doctor to 50 people. And the only people that could prescribe morphine were doctors, vets, and dentists. And we really needed people that could do it straight away. And the government allowed us, our nurses, when they were trained with a diploma, for they could now prescribe morphine. Now, we made it at the kitchen sink, and you saw me and all that. But now the American Cancer Society gave us the equipment to make it in large volumes. And morphine in Uganda is free to everybody who has been prescribed by a registered prescriber. And this is because when we first trained the nurses, the government were really on board with us, and they wanted us to be able. This morphine was so cheap. I didn't realize it was cheap until I got to Africa, but people could afford to buy it. But, the poorest of the poor couldn't afford to buy it. So it became free to everybody. And we were the first to have nurses prescribe morphine in the world, to be prescribers in the world. Next, please.
And
This
sorry,
is
could you just go back 1 slide and explain the differences in concentration and how you made sure that people didn't make a mistake of the concentration of morphine?
Yeah, well, when we made it at the kitchen sink, we knew exactly what we were doing, because the one we use most is what we call the red morphine, and that is dyed red, so we know that's the strength of that is 5 milligrams per 5 mil. Okay, and most patients will start on maybe 2.5 or 5 milligrams, but you have to titrate it against their pain. So that was the first one. Then there was a second one. It's green is the first one. Sorry, green is the first one. Red is the stronger one. It's 10 milligrams per 5 mil. And that's for people who need more. And then there's another one, which is 50 milligrams per 5 mil, which we rarely use because, these patients say, I was in agony till you came and you gave me morphine. And they can die comfortably because they've stopped screaming. The families are now at peace. And, do you want to know anything more? I can tell you about that. It's a big unit now, and it's called our morphine unit, morphine production unit, and the joint medical store in Entebbe, which actually takes medicines around to all the different hospitals in Uganda. they come and they collect what we have made, and then it is given to the places that have requested it by the pharmacists. But sometimes pharmacists forget to order it, and then patients are thrown back into pain. But we're trying to work on that one. But the Palliative Care Association of Uganda, which started with us in '99 and is now very much a big one for the country, because we realised that having a model hospice, you had to be in a model country. And now 70% of the districts have a palliative care service going, mostly run by nurses.
And
Next, please.
could you comment also, I'm sorry to interrupt, comment, what did you do when patients were no longer able to swallow or had difficulty swallowing, weren't able to drink the oral morphine? How did you get the morphine into them? Thank you.
Okay, the morphine is very small that they're taking anyway, but for a patient who can't swallow or something, we can give them a concentrated form and titrate it to what they need and just put it under the tongue. They absorb it. So we don't have a problem with that at all. Does that answer your question? Are you still there, Eric?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next slide, please. This on the left here, you see us. That's Martha doing home care at the roadside. They would be going in Mbarara because we now have 3 hospices, and the other 2 hospices came in '98. And in Mbarara, it's a huge district, and they would be going to do an outreach somewhere far away, and people who would normally come to the hospice would sit under the banana tree or under something, and we would see them there, and we could even bring them into the car to examine them and do that on the way there. I put this picture in because it shows how wonderful God is, because these are red poppies, but the poppies that give you morphine are white, and they're under controlled things. But I found these in the garden of a cousin of mine in Liverpool. And next door is the foxglove. And I don't know whether you all remember as I do, but digoxin comes from the foxglove. And that was the one thing that could help people with heart disease when I was graduating. Next, please. So this was the first distance learning diploma for our nurses. And 20 students came from Uganda, Ethiopia, Malawi, Tanzania, and Karamoja. Karamoja is a very poor district here in Uganda. And the following year, we had 19 more, including Zambia and Cameroon. So we were really off the ground at this point because we were training the nurses with this diploma. Next, please. Now, that says Uganda in the world today, but that was in 2014. And in 2014, we were considered to be on a par with British palliative care and everything else. It's the only time it ever happened that they study all the different countries and see which one is the best. And Uganda got that accolade that year. Next, please. This was my last visit in Africa because I was very sick the next year. I was at home, I got COVID, I had heart problems, I had to have stents put in. And when I came back, I said, I will never fly again. So Burkina Faso is very, very, very special to me. It's a French-speaking country. And that's the Minister of Health that came to see us. And when we were running the course, and there's a sister there, Sister Mary, she's not in there, who is a surgeon who's taken up palliative care as well as a surgery. Next. This was in Benin. Because I failed French twice in my O-levels, I had to have somebody to translate into French for me. This is Timothée, who was volunteering with us. He's from France, speaks English and French very well. And he would translate for me what they were saying. And this is Sylvia. Sylvia Dive is from Congo. She's been with us now for several years. And she actually is the person that speaks very well with ministries, etc. But you really need a doctor. They need to have a doctor. They need to see the doctor and know that there's a doctor involved because that's the hierarchy in medicine. Next, please. This was when I was in Benin, and we were in a general hospital run by monks, and this poor boy was burnt, you can see. And we see lots of children burnt because mostly they have fires indoors and kids fall into it. And the burns were terribly painful to them. And it was only when we started using morphine in the burns unit in the big Malago hospital here, because they would scream when they were going to be put in the bath, you know, and now they get morphine before they're put in the bath. But you could know when you were passing the burns ward because of the screams coming out from it. No longer. Next, please. This is our ethos, and this is terribly important. No matter where we are, then the first one is the patient and family are the center of all our decisions, whether we're in accounts, whether we are in administration. We must think, what does this decision mean to my patients? Okay. Now, the second one, that in our teams we care and support each other. So if we have a problem, maybe I used to quote, if a nurse comes and has a row with her husband over the breakfast table, she's all upset, we can help her, we can talk to her, we can, show that we support her. And then the last word is respect and care for networking organizations. And having been involved with the foundation of the Palliative Care Association and later the African Palliative Care Association, we have been friends with them, but sometimes we overlap in what we're doing. But anyway, it's the hospice spirit I want you to know about. And this, I wanted to read that to you because it's written by a guy who is what is he?
Epidemiologist.
Hmm?
Epidemiologist.
He's an epidemiologist, and he writes, what's the use of seeing statistics if you haven't held the hand of the person who is suffering? And to me, that was a wonderful saying. Okay, so that's just a simpler way of saying the hospice ethos. Next, please. This is Bishop Kevin Dowling, who I asked to come up. We used to have a week in May every year when we would have a guest speaker, and it was a very heavy time with HIV. He came, he talked to the people who had HIV, he talked to the carers who had HIV and were trying to look after their relatives. And, I had sent him the ethos before he came up. And lastly, after speaking to religious and everybody, he came to us and he spoke to the team. And he said, your hospice ethos is full to overflowing with values which reveal a spirit, a way of being, of living, of relating, of acting. And when we talk about it, we say, yes, this will alter your situation and how you work with your family and how you work with schools. So he is holding a child there because he is, I presume he's still there. He's a Redemptorist priest. I heard him speaking in Cape Town, and he was he was such a wonderful speaker, and he was living in a hospice where if they gave him food from the hospice, he ate it. If he didn't bother. But anyway, he's a bit of a saint, and he stayed in my house, and sometimes I just would, it would be silence, and I talked to him and he wouldn't answer me. And he was using centering prayer. Now, centering prayer, he taught us, is when my God, our God, is within me. And if I get stuck, this patient's pain isn't going and I'm doing all I can for them, we turn to the God within us and ask him to help us. Next, please. So spiritual values are very important because they will help me personally turning to my God. And the habit of centering prayer is still with us. We had a day of reflection last Friday, and it was run completely by the team, and it was an amazing day. It really was. And the person who led us was Nelson, who is doing our IT at the moment. He's here with me. Okay, so that, it just showed me that these spiritual values will continue after I pop my clogs. Next, please. This is a picture of Jesus on the wall. And my relationship with Jesus has to be with him on the wall. I can't go to church anymore, but one of the sisters comes with communion to me every Sunday. But when I'm in a problem, I look at this picture, I pray to Christ, who is my role model. Next, please. This is Desmond Tutu, and you heard what he said about me. Ubuntu, we talked about Ubuntu. Ubuntu was the religion that they had in Africa before we all came and decided that everybody was pagans, which was ridiculous because this Ubuntu particularly gave hospitality, and they did it for everybody. You know, a stranger comes into a village, he would give him a bed. If it was a man, he might give him a lady to keep him warm in the bed. But they did it in the traditional ways. And Bishop Desmond Tutu was a real model for us. Next, please. And this is Ubuntu, and this is the spirit of Ubuntu. And somebody has come from abroad, and they put sweets under the tree, and they said, whoever reaches here first, he will get this. Can I go back? Okay. Yeah. And so he blows a whistle. Nobody comes forward. He blows it again. Nobody comes. He says, what's the matter? Why aren't you racing to get them? They said, we can't go alone. We must go together. And that is the thing, a saying that they have. If you want to go far, go together. If you want to go
Fast,
alone.
go alone.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is hanging up on my wall. And when you come to see me here, you will see it. And it was made in America by Nancy Hines and her friends. And it gives you the stories of Ubuntu. Next, please. Suffering is much more than physical pain. And you can only get through to the other suffering after you've controlled the physical pain. And this is psychological pain, it's spiritual pain, it's worry about the family, what will happen when I die. And you can see in this man's face how worried he is. He knows he's going to pass. He wants to make sure the family are all right. Next, please. I just want to go through this one with you because the Good Samaritan was somebody who came from another country. The people that country was Jerusalem. When this man was found on the floor, bleeding from a wound because somebody had put a knife into him and stolen all his goods. Now, what this Good Samaritan did, he poured wine into the wound. He knew that alcohol would help it. And then he lifted up the man and he put him into his 1 horsepower vehicle, which was a horse, and took him to the nearest health centre, which in those days was the nearest inn. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, now, let's go. No, that's not the same one. Go back. I want to show you this one. Yeah, okay. So here we see what's happening here. This man's on his mobile phone. Do you see him? And this fella's rushing to the next meeting. We can all be medical, but we're at meetings. And it's a very difficult time for the sick, actually. Very, very difficult. Next, please. Patients want to be back with their patient and family. And this was one of our very first ladies who had a wound opened. This was cancer, and the smell was terrible. And she was in the ward where my very first nurse, Rose Kiwanuka, was the sister in charge. And they had to put her outside because the smell was so bad from her. And we came and we controlled her pain, and we got the wounds to heal, and she went back to her mother. Her mother was breaking stones up for richer people to put in their pathways, and they came from the quarry in Muyenga, and there was 9 children already there, and she brought 3 children with her, and these were the children of the grandmother's children who had HIV. Next, please. This lady didn't want to have any surgery at all, but we managed by talking to her gradually. She got surgery. Here she came back, able to wear her blouse. Next, please. Oh, okay. And that is, again, Burkitt's lymphoma in a child, which is the commonest cancer in children that we see, called after Burkitt, who was a great man. When I was in Nigeria, he used to write to us for the statistics of cancer patients there. He was doing a lot of research. Right, next. Yeah, I let everybody go home for Christmas, and then suddenly I was asked to go and take this child home. And all we had was a short-based Land Rover. And you can see he's had a 4-quarter amputation. You see here the slope on his shoulder here for a sarcoma. And he got fever, and the granny was terrified that he was going to die in the hospital while his parents were in Tanzania, because one of them was Ugandan and one of them was Tanzanian. So they begged me to take him home, swore to me that they lived within 20 kilometers, which was our catchment area. I'm telling you, it was about 40 kilometers to the town. And then I had to climb a mountain in this machine. And a little boy in the ward who spoke the same language as them, he came with us and he translated everything for us. Bashir lived for another 6 weeks after that, and our very first volunteer nurse would come with me. She was the wife of Professor Kakande, who has just recently died. Her name is Bridget Kakande, and she helped us. She was our very first volunteer nurse. Next, please. Now, I'd never seen such a big bucket as I saw on. This was in Malawi, in Blantyre, in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, where they had a place to feed up the patients who were very thin. And this little boy, we had introduced morphine some time before, and he was playing with the other kids without almost not knowing that that he was actually doing this. And because his pain was controlled and he was a child, so he wanted to play. Now, this is in a church in the Longway, which is the capital now of Malawi. And this church is between the government hospital and the HIV centre. And this was designed by one of the medical missionaries. It shows two people on this cross. We see Christ dying and we see Christ rising again. And this gives a very big message to us, that we can help our people to rise again when they rise above the pain. Next, please. I just wanted to show this Dr. Stephen Motiti, and this is Bishop Desmond Tutu. Both of these had HIV, not through their own fault, through partners who were HIV positive and were married to them, actually. And both of them got to the stage where they were actually dying, and they came to hospice, and we looked after them. They're still two of our best friends, and they will come and talk. Bishop Gideon is quite an inspiring speaker. And Dr. Watiti is working now. He's in some distant land here in Africa when I tried to get in touch with him. But this was taken at the APCA conference some years back. Next, please. We're nearly finished, I think. Yeah. David Tasma said to Cicely, David Tasma was a Polish refugee, and I remember my grandmother, they took in a family of Polish refugees. After the war, they came flooding into UK, and he was an architect, but he couldn't get a job as an architect. He was making wooden boxes somewhere in Speak, and they had a little girl called Basha, which means Barbara, and anyway, David Tasma was a patient in the ward and he was dying. And Dame Cecily was the nurse there. And she went to him. He was Jewish. So she said to him, can I say a psalm for you? She wanted to read the song, The Lord is my shepherd. And he said, no, I want what is in your mind and in your heart. And that's what our patients are saying to us. They don't want us to come with anything artificial. They want what is in your heart. And we have wounded hearts, and every wound that we get helps us to help other people who are wounded. So we are wounded healers. We have to remember that and remember our wounds so that we can help other people. I think we finished, have we? No, another one. Oh, this is our new organization, which I started 4 years ago, because we found children who had were cured of their cancer, but now they were left with a disability. They couldn't get jobs. And we've only one employee, and it's very hard to get money. But here you see Vicky, who was a dressmaker before, and we're not quite sure how she had Burkitt's lymphoma in her spinal cord, and we looked after her as a child. And now we sent her to college where she learned dress design, and she's fully ready to go. And this boy is Haji. Haji is a Muslim boy, a very spiritual Muslim boy. And he didn't do very well in his O-levels, but we got him to a trade school where he's learned to do plumbing. He always wanted to be a plumber, so he's now a plumber. Now, this one is Catherine. Catherine has written a book of her story. She's an amazing girl. She's lost both her legs in Texas Children's Hospital because they tried to save her life. They were going to use the bones in one leg where she had pain to reconstitute her bum because it was her actual problem was in the tumor was in the bum. And she couldn't go to school because she had to lie on her front and look up at the board. She couldn't do anything. So from she was 14, she was being taken to traditional healers. She had snakes put on her. She had everything was being done for her until they could raise the money to come to Kampala, to the Cancer Institute. And the Cancer Institute's definition of cancer was one that responds to chemo or radiotherapy. And hers didn't respond to either. So somebody from Texas Children's Hospice was visiting the, not a hospice, it was a hostel where she was she'd been lying for some years being told every so often that she was going to die within 3 months. And this lady came in, she was a doctor, but she was also on the fundraising committee. And she said, we can take you to America and we can repair this. And they did. And there's a video of that operation. But Catherine is a wonderful lady. She's written about her life from when she was first got that tumor to now. And just in the last few weeks, she's been teaching because she does wonderful crochet. And we work with a slum area called Namawongo. And she's teaching the mothers of the students in this school that is run by a young man from Brighton. And it's, he has every child is paid for by a donor. And so she's been going in to teach the mothers how to crochet so they can make money. And these are the ones. Last year, we got a grant from the Irish Society, and we were able to train 3 girls and 3 boys. The 3 boys have learned to use the mechanics of a mobile phone, and they now can repair mobile phones wherever they're living. And the girls all have trained to be hairdressers and beauty salons. So we're very happy with what it's doing, but it's still very small. As I say, we've only 1 employee. Next, please. This is my family in Uganda.
So Anne, please make this your last slide. I'm sorry, we need to stop, but please give your final comment on this last slide. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I thank God every day that I'm in Uganda and I'm not home in Liverpool in an old people's home because I saw enough of those when I was in geriatric medicine. So my first person is Anne. Anne was a carer of one of our first patients, and she was sitting next to a lady who she was learning how to care for a patient at home. And this lady knew us very well. And she said to me, you're looking for a housekeeper. Why don't you talk to Anne? So I did. I talked to Anne, and Anne came. And now a lot of these are her family. Mary is her daughter. Mary, who's been helping me. This is Alice. Alice has 3 children. Her eldest boy isn't there, but he's doing civil engineering and he finishes next year. Now, her next 2 are very small. One is Vicky, and she's in P7, which means it's the year when they are going to go into the secondary school, so they keep them at school for a long time. And this is Francesca. She was called after Pope Francis because her mother was very pregnant when she went down to see Pope Francis when he came to Uganda. So she was called after him. This is Margaret, isn't it?
Yeah.
Margaret has a son, Ryan, who's now 15, and he's about to do his O-levels, I think, very shortly. Who's that? You don't know?
That's Mary.
You?
Mm.
That is Mary with my arm around her. Yeah. Okay, so that's it. That's my family here. They look after me so well, and I couldn't be looked after better. And I just thank God every day for every one of them. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And this has been deeply moving for me, and I'm sure for many others. You are a blessing to all of us. And we're so grateful. I think I can speak certainly for my team and for everyone on this call. Thank you for sharing your life with us and with the world, and thank you for inspiring us and leading us. And thanks to all who joined. Thanks, Dr. Hadi. Thanks, Susan, and thanks to all around the world who joined us with this last lecture of the year in the program in global palliative care at Harvard Medical School. Please take care of each other and of yourselves, even as you take care of those most vulnerable. Thank you and goodbye.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to your team. God bless.
Thanks all.